Well, hello and welcome back to freephotoshop.com and video tutorial number 8 in this in-depth series all about the levels command here inside Photoshop. You know, the more you use levels, the easier it becomes. And as you move further on down the line, you're going to get faster and faster at making high quality modifications to your photographs. And in this video, I'm going to show you some really helpful keyboard shortcuts as we make some real-time alterations to a photograph. Okay, so right off the bat, I'm going to hit Ctrl-Shift-O here on the PC or Command-Shift-O on the Mac to open up the bridge. And I'm providing all of these photographs that I'm using throughout the series on the freephotoshop.com website. So I urge you to download the files and then work along with me. There really is nothing that makes learning as easy as actually doing it yourself and learning from the mistakes you make in some situations. I'm going to open up this image called Dallas Skyline by simply navigating to the correct folder and then using the arrow keys to highlight the image, and then hit the Enter key on the PC or the Return key on the Mac to open up the image inside Adobe Photoshop CS3 or whatever version of Photoshop you're running. Doesn't really matter, as we discussed earlier. The levels commands have been available since the earlier versions of Photoshop and are also available inside the Elements variations of the software too. I'm going to hit the Tab key to hide the palettes and option bar from view so we can get the best view of this photograph taken from the viewing level of the Union Tower in Dallas, Texas, way back in 2004. And then I'm going to increase the view size to 50%, not only to make the image bigger on screen but also to reach a good viewing percentage. And as luck would have it, we can see probably around about 95% of the image at this view size, so that works out pretty good. Okay, I'm going to hit Ctrl or Command L to open up levels. A good start to a video tutorial all about keyboard shortcuts here inside the levels command. Now, as always, opening up levels takes us directly to the composite view where we can move through the values and buttons by hitting the Tab key. And we can also move in the opposite direction by holding down the Shift key and pressing Tab. And by the way, this is all standard stuff here inside Photoshop. None of this is specific to the levels command. I'm going to tab down to the input value where we can amend the shadows of the photograph. And when I'm ready to make changes to the values itself, I'm going to use the up arrow key to nudge the value up. And then I can use the down arrow key to nudge the value down. I can also do that in increments of 10 by holding down the Shift key whilst using the up arrow to increase the value and the down arrow to decrease the value. I can also dial in the actual number if I want to work that way. So if I want this value to be 100, I can just go ahead and type 100 on the keyboard straight into this box. It turns out that that's not a very helpful modification to this image, so I'm going to hit Shift down arrow 10 times to return that value to 0. Now, sometimes when you're inputting values, you may want to navigate around the image to see how different elements react to different values. And you can do that very easily by hitting Ctrl plus to zoom into the center of the image, and then Ctrl minus to zoom out. That's Command plus and minus on the Mac. You can also zoom into a specific area by Ctrl spacebar clicking inside the image to zoom into the center of the click point. You can also Ctrl Alt spacebar to zoom out. That's Command spacebar to zoom in and Command Option spacebar to zoom out if you're using a Mac. I'm going to zoom in just a touch here, and then I'm going to move around the canvas by spacebar dragging with the mouse, which gives me access to the hand tool. Once I release the spacebar, the cursor defaults back to the eyedropper tool, which allows us to sample colours with the levels controls active. We can also hold down the Shift key to access the colour sampler tool on the fly, and we'll be going into both the eyedropper and colour sampler tools in much more detail when we look at accurately finding shadows and highlights inside an image a little later on in the training series. For now, I just wanted to make you aware that they are indeed there and available to you. We can also change channels without using the drop-down menu by using the same shortcuts that are available to you inside the channels palette itself. And they are Control or Command 1 for the red channel, Control or Command 2 for the green channel, Control or Command 3 for the blue channel, and then Control or Command tilde for the composite view. These shortcuts are also listed here in the drop-down menu just in case you want to reference them later on or at a later date. The buttons over here on the right hand side also have quick and easy shortcuts. You can OK your changes by hitting the Enter key here on the PC or the Return key on the Mac. You can also cancel out at any time by using the Escape key. You can also access these options by holding down Alt or Option on the Mac in conjunction with the letter inside the button that's underlined. So I could press Alt or Option S, for example, instead of pressing the Save button. Some of these shortcuts may seem a little unnecessary, by the way, but I'm just telling you so you know they're there, and you never know when they're going to come in handy. Okay, finally inside levels we have access to one level of undo. So if I hit Control or Command 2 to switch to the green channel, and then locate the input value by using the Tab or Shift Tab controls to move through the different values, then I'll type in 100 to make every brightness value in the green channel under 100 green, and because of the influence of the other channels we're turning the image to a pinky magenta kind of colour. Now that's obviously a mistake, so I'll want to return to the previous value, which in this case was 0, but had we been working inside the channels then it could have been any value at all. So to return to it I'll hit the Control Z keyboard shortcut that we all know and love here inside of Photoshop, here on the PC at least, Command Z on the Mac, to undo that modification. Okay, so let's get started on this photograph of the Dallas horizon. I'll begin by holding down the Alt key here on the PC or the Option key on the Mac, and then just hitting the Reset button just in case we've made any changes that we didn't want to whilst I was running through those shortcuts. Now I'm going to hold down the Control or Command key and then press 1 to switch out to the red channel, and I'm going to bump the shadows up by first of all tabbing down to the entry box and then pressing Shift up arrow twice to move up to 20 brightness levels. Then perhaps I'll hit the up arrow once to give me a value of 21, and then I'll tab across to the highlights, and there's not much space to reduce this one, but I'll down arrow just a couple of times to give me a value of say 253. Okay, I'll switch to the green channel by using the keyboard shortcut Control 2 or Command 2 on the Mac, and seeing as we're already active on the highlights, let's nudge the slider down to say 245. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to Alt or Option click on the highlight slider just to see if we're getting much clipping, because this is one value I'm not too sure about. And we are getting a little bit of clipping, so I'm going to back off on this value to say 248, and it's not the end of the world if we only clip one channel, by the way. It's when we clip all three that we need to start worrying. Anyhow, 248 should see us safe there. Next I'm going to Shift Tab to the shadows of the green channel here, and I'm going to Shift up arrow that value to 20 brightness levels, and as it turns out that's a pretty nice position to leave the shadows at. Next I'll hit Control or Command 3 to switch to the blue channel, and I'm going to increase the shadows to a brightness level of 20 I'd say as well, and that looks pretty good. Now I'll tab across to the highlights and decrease this down to around about 225 by using the Shift down arrow combination. Now the problem here is that we've come to the beginning of the brightness peak, or the end of the brightness peak depending on which way you're looking at it, but as a result the image is looking too blue. So let's shift that back up again, and hopefully you can see what I mean as I move this slider up and down. If we leave it by the peak here, then the image has way too much blue in it, and as we have a fairly intense sunburst over here on the horizon, we need the image to still look warm. Not as warm and exposed as it looked when we started, but just not blue either. So I'm going to take this value up to about 245, and that's about as far as we want to go with this particular slider. Now with the issue of keeping the image a little warm in mind, I'm going to switch back to the red channel by hitting Control or Command 1. Then I'm going to Shift Tab back to the gamma value here in the middle, the slider that controls the midtones, and I'm going to sway the midtones here inside the red channel to be slightly more red. So I'll increase this value to 1.05, and I'm doing that by nudging the up arrow key 5 times. Finally, I'm going to switch back to the composite view by hitting Ctrl or Command tilde, and I'm going to darken the midtones in this image inside all 3 channels, but instead of adjusting the colours separately, this time I'll just take the gamma value, better known as the midtone slider, remember, down to a value of say 0.9. Okay, things are looking good here inside this photograph. I'm going to hit Alt P here on the PC, that's Option P on the Mac, to turn off the previewing capabilities of the levels command, so we're now viewing the image in the background, minus any modifications we've made so far. Then I'm going to hit Alt or Option P once more to see just how far we've come, and hopefully you'll agree that we've made a big difference, a very positive difference to this photograph of a Texas horizon as seen from the Union Tower. Next I'm going to hit Alt or Option S on the keyboard in order to save these settings. And by the way, we're not saving anything about the actual image here. All we're doing is saving a small amount of metadata that relates to the values we've entered here inside of levels. And as a result, the size of the file we're now creating, that by the way is not linked to the original file in any way, shape or form, is very small. In fact, it's just a few K, which in digital imaging terms is extremely small. And I'd always recommend doing this, by the way. It's just a good way of keeping track of the values you've entered, just in case you need them back in the future. It's a great habit to get into. Anyhow, you can see that I already have a levels ALV file here, which I saved when practicing this tutorial. I don't want to overwrite it, so I'll go ahead and give it a different name. Say Dallas Horizon 1. How ingenious is that, hey? Okay, I'm going to hit the Enter or Return key here to save the file and return to Photoshop. Finally, before we leave levels, I want to show you 2 more shortcuts that might come in handy. The first one is to open up the Layers palette, and you can do that by hitting F7 on the keyboard. Hit F7 again to make it disappear. Also, if you want to access the Info palette, you can hit the F8 key. Now in these circumstances, it's opened up underneath the Levels dialog box. So I'll move the Levels dialog box out of the way and then drag the Info palette to where I want it, and then I'm free to put levels back. And the great thing about the Info palette is that we get to see the RGB values listed as original values, so as they were before we opened levels, and then the modified brightness values. If you keep your eye here, I'm going to place the standard eyedropper tool over the image, and you can see the original values on the left and the modified values on the right. Anyhow, I'll hit the F8 key once again to hide the Info palette. We'll be looking at that in much more detail later on in this series. Then I'll hit the Enter key here on the PC or the Return key on the Mac to accept the changes we've made here. And just in case you're in any doubt as to what we've achieved, then this is before we applied our levels alterations, and this is the correctly exposed, perfectly adjusted version of the image, all thanks to the levels command. Well, I hope you've learnt some new shortcuts here. Keep them in mind, because I'll guarantee you that if you're going to be using levels on a regular basis to fix your own photographs, then one day they'll come in very, very handy. In the next video tutorial, we'll be examining what the output values do and look at a few practical ways to engage them. For now, thanks for watching here at freephotoshop.com. I'll see you in the next video.